morning. Welcome to our podcast, Think Big, Think Positive channel. Myself, Kiran, and my colleague Sudhir, we're going to have a series of discussions on the future of workspace, well being, and leadership. It's going to be a forward thinking podcast where our viewers can learn from the leaders like ourselves around effective leadership, employee well being, evolving demands of hybrid workforce, and of course, impact of technology. On that note, today, we're going to dive into the art of building winning teams and
Wow.
unlocking the full potential of employee engagement. Have you ever wondered, Sudhir, what sets high performing teams apart from the rest?
Wow, that's a intense question to begin with. Uh, and good morning to all of you. I'm sorry, let's begin there. So high performance teams, the first thing, there's a traditional way to look at this topic, which is to say that teams that meet the objectives for which they have come together, right? Teams are entities which are not very permanent in many cases. They could be project teams, they could be innovation related teams and so on. But they could be teams that last for a lifetime. Now, high performance, when you kind of put a label to that, then in my view and my experience, seeing quite a few high performance teams, what sets them apart is the fact that they're unified by a common purpose. They've got strong collaboration going along in the teams. They
Yeah.
have mutual trust. They guard each other's back, including that of their leaders and vice versa, the leader of the rest, of that of the rest of the team. And they're guys who come together to meet not just the organization's purpose, but also their own individual purposes. Quite often, people forget that there's an individual also that they need to take care, which is themselves. And
Mm.
sometimes the teams that they're a part of, they could be peers, they could be juniors that are there in the team who work with them. So to me, HPT, let's call it HPT in short, high performance teams, the defining factors of them are some of those things in terms of meeting the company objectives, meeting their own objectives, having the backs of each other, building very strong trust, and driving innovation. And for doing all of these things, there's one thing that I think that's important is passion as a trait. So this is what I think. But having said this, I'm kind of curious, Kiran. What are some of the traits that you see
Yeah.
are defining characteristics or elements in HPTs, high performance teams?
No, I like the way, to begin with, Sudhir, I like the way you summarized it, right, in terms of high performance teams. Is it fair to say it's a group of they're a group of self-realized individuals with specialist expertise and complementary skills aligned to a committed goals and achieving superior results? Is it fair to say that?
Brilliant. Nice
Right.
summary. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think thank you. And I think going back to in terms of traits that you've asked, Sudhir, for me, based on my experience after leading a high-performing team myself, and again after interacting with several of C-level executives and the way they operate their teams, understand these are the teams that exhibit high level of collaboration and innovation within the team. I mean, there's a high level of mutual trust and accountability, and these in fact these are the fundamental aspects for high performing teams. And what I like about high performing teams, they have their own values, they have their own norms, managerial perspectives, leadership behaviors, and the beauty about these teams, any conflicts within the workplace are resolved effectively with the help of some robust methods such as positive energy, synergy, and strong open communication among team members. So pretty much they are the kind of guiding force for rest of the organizations for them to excel.
Wow. Quite a handful. But what really kind of stood out for me was the fact that you brought in the element of vulnerability, right? Wherein
Yeah.
they are open to discussing feedback and they're open to mutually kind
Yes.
of in a way sublimating their egos at workplace and trying to work together to solve problems which are bigger than what they're kind of capable of trying to solve individually. I think that was one of the things that I was able to take away from what you just said. So, having said that, Kiran, one of the things that you did mention was indicating a bit towards what we could call as engagement, right?
Yes.
We've heard this term very often as engagement, which quite often gets confused with outbound training, a team party on a Friday, a bash in the nearby bowling alley, and you could kind of go on innovating a long list of things that comes in the, not in the way, let me put it the other way around, comes in the name or the garb of employee engagement, because those are the ones that give kind of emotional high-end bonding for people at some point or the
Mm.
other. I'm just curious to understand from you a little bit on how have you seen this term engagement kind of evolve, or what are your perspectives of engagement in itself, employee engagement?
I think this is my favorite topic, Sudhir, needless to say, and you hit the nail here. In fact, there is a very loose and woolly statement when it comes to employee engagement. And going back to high performing teams that we spoke about, right? And if you look at, you can't develop a high performing team if all your team members are truly engaged. Yes, there's always a degree of few people are disengaged, or perhaps there's a bit of emotions involved in it, which we understand. But for your to develop a high performing teams, you need to have a workforce engaged. And in fact, I would go and say to a length that um, uh, in fact, engaged workforce are your heartbeat for developing a high performing engine. If I had to summarize it in analogy, they are like a well-oiled machine, right? Which whereby each member has a specific function, and when all these functions working seamlessly, then you develop a well-oiled machine, right? Then that's where the performance is peaked. Going back to that word employee engagement, for me, it's not about having a cup of coffee or having certain activities like team building activities. For me, the way I look at highly engaged workforce are the ones who take responsibility, who are emotionally connected with the team and the company, and who has a desire to progress, who
Yeah,
has the ability to motivate themselves and others, who produce high quality work. And going back to your example, right, they are the ones who collaborate and innovate within the team, right? And they are the ones, again, you talked about vulnerability and also accountability, right? Admitting their own mistakes and always look at the ways they can continuously improve. For me, these are the traits that really create truly engaged workforce. And for me, these are the traits that one, as a leader, you need to look up to in terms of if your employees are truly engaged or not. On
awesome.
that note, Sudhir, what about the global statistics? And in fact, I was looking at the global data point, right? As per Gallup, 23% of employees are just engaged in the organization. Does that give you an alarm? What does it?
Wow.
What does this numbers tell you?
Yeah, I did see that. Gallup says only 23% of employees are engaged in the global statistics, and varies a little bit by country and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, that's a very worrisome kind of statistics to note, which means 75% of the
Yeah.
workforce that we have aren't engaged, in the sense the alignment between what I typically call as the head, heart, and hand isn't there, right? It simply means that people are contributing whatever is probably required for them to get by the day, and then rest of it is taken care by, the forces. So it's kind of worrying for organizations, because this means bulk of the competency and the potential of people aren't being harnessed.
Mm.
And there are various other statistics that kind of add on to the number that you just mentioned. In terms of, if you see the global numbers around burnout, the
Yeah.
global numbers around psychological well-being of employees, the global numbers about lost productivity because of teams not being in a high performance mode or lack of engagement of employees, leadership effectiveness. I mean, you
Yeah.
name the areas, and there are statistics to give you what's the kind of cumulative loss that we are having globally on this aspect of employee engagement. And there's a huge potential for leadership to intervene and extract the best out of the resources that they have at workplace, which is the human workforce. Because all said and done, when you try and compare the forward-looking organizations with organizations that aren't so forward-looking, you will clearly see that what is the differentiator there is the aspect around engagement, right? If I were to give examples of highly innovative teams like
Mm,
Meta, which is the erstwhile Facebook, Google, OpenAI, you name the kind of companies that are in the bleeding edge of technology on in the digital space. Likewise, there are plenty of steel makers and plenty of manufacturing organizations and services organizations, certain banks, without naming them here. I tell you what sets them apart from my own experience of having worked with many of them very closely as their advisor is their ability to build high performance teams which are oriented towards driving innovation at workplace, right? And innovation here is not something that happens in a lab. It's about trying to find the right kind of business problems that are plaguing the business in the operating model level or the strategic level
mm.
and try and address them with a high performance team put in place to go and chase that. So that statistic is very revealing, and that's something for leadership to sit up and notice. That's what I would say.
No, I like the way you put it. I mean, clearly, I agree with you as well. Leadership and management can directly influence that numbers, right?
Yeah.
And it clearly shows that leaders have to prioritize investing in engagement as one of their top priority in order to truly develop an high performing culture and high performing teams. I mean, again, going back to the fact, right? So there, you can't just develop an high performing team. It doesn't happen that way. It needs to be imbibed in your culture. And of course, high performance leadership plays a critical role as well. So these
Absolutely.
three things are intertrajectory, sorry.
Yeah, it's
So
intertwined very closely, right? It's like a
yes.
braid. It's like a rope where all these three things have to come together and stay strong. And I think, Kiran, one of the things we probably should be planning to do in the coming days is why not run certain things for leadership as master classes around this area of engagement and things like compassionate leadership and so on. What do you think?
No, absolutely. And going by that point, so there you'll be pleased to know we already have two things in planned. In February, we will be looking at compassionate leadership and culture activation seminar that will be organized in Bangalore. It's absolutely it's a must attend for CEOs and C-suite to come and I mean everyone these days are struggling, right, in
Yeah,
terms of attracting and retaining talent, which is one of the biggest priority. And also they wanted to bring that innovation, right? They want the teams to be proactive. And for that to happen, you need to build that compassionate leadership, right? They go hand in hand with the employee engagement. And the other seminar we're planning to conduct is on in March.
hmm,
Again, about how do you re-energize your teams to perform better, and that's something is well planned in March as well. And I would strongly ask our viewers to watch out, and we will be announcing that shortly. So it's a great opportunity for us CSU to again participate, network with the like-minded people. The good thing is, as a leader, we need to be vulnerable. We need to acknowledge the problem to begin with, and we need to look at the ways that we could further improve.
quite true. Quite true. I think
Right?
vulnerability is a very key trait of successful people. I
Yeah.
think there are reams and reams of research that is being written in recent times that the most successful leaders are the ones who are very vulnerable. Vulnerable doesn't mean that you're out there crying about every problem that's there in the world and owning it up. It's about saying, how do you take accountability and how do you say that you don't know? Because sometimes leaders don't want to acknowledge and they think that's a sign of weakness of saying that they don't know. But I think that those are brilliant words, and there's a very interesting anecdote that I read. One of the hyperscalers, when the new CEO came in, one of the first things he said is, "I don't know." That turned that company around simply because the people were willing to help the new CEO make a success of the role simply because he was open to being vulnerable in front of his top leadership. And there's no better way to do that when you're in your early stages of your career as a CEO or even just aiming for those roles. So I know, Kiran, between you and I, we have the newsletter that we publish every month. So
Yes.
those of you who can't make for our events in February, and like Kiran mentioned, and the one in March, we welcome you to keep in touch with us through our newsletters.
Yes.
We keep posting a few things on LinkedIn. Do connect with us. And for those of you who want to have a personal connect and discuss in depth on any of these topics, Kiran and I will be open to scheduling slots on our calendars. Calendly, we have been using between us to open slots for any of you to pick a 30 minutes or a 45-minute slot for a conversation about this topic. It doesn't have to be in terms of saying, how can we help you? It can just be brainstorming in terms of what are some of the questions that are bothering you. And we are more than willing to share our perspectives and work together with you. So,
I like the point just to touch upon, Sudhir. I think I agree with you as well. I mean, you and me, we work with several leaders all our lives, right? And one thing is very common is uh, CEOs acknowledging that, or C-suite acknowledging that they don't know everything, right? And we don't need to pretend they know everything. And it's very, very important when you acknowledge that and ask for help. And that's where the magic happens. And I just wanted to touch upon the point that you mentioned about the vulnerability, right? Not knowing things is a great sign because that's where you ask for help. And the help will certainly give you the desired results that you're looking for.
yeah,
And I think it's very important, Sudhir, we also need to look at when we talk about high performance team, right? There's so much we can learn from sports teams, right? You mentioned about the organization of the Meta, right? There's so much of things that we can learn from the sports teams. In fact, from the military as well, right? Where leadership is at its pinnacle there,
yeah,
right? The way they operate. And one interesting example when I really touches me is Wikipedia, which is one of the most interesting, right? I mean, whereby volunteer writers and editors they contribute on imparting their knowledge and facts about the world in the website, so that people like me and you can have access to that easy to understand the database. I mean, they are virtual, but
yeah,
yet is a high performance, right? For me, that
absolutely.
Wikipedia is one such great example. And
The whole open source community, right, Kiran?
yes,
The open
yes,
source community is driven through those kinds of things. It's kind of interesting. I was reading some research long back, and the kind of motivation that drives this has got a name. And
yes.
so it's an interesting name. It's called deontic motivation, where
Uh,
you do
okay.
something, where you contribute something to the society without expecting in return anything,
Anything. Yeah.
or getting a return which is frugal or so minimal compared to the contribution that you're making. For example, there are soldiers of India, I'm sure many of the neighboring countries as well, in Siachen, one of the worst places in the world to stay alive, right? There are
Yes.
people guarding the borders 24 bar 7 bar 365 in those inhospitable environments. You can't pay them money enough to guard those borders for the kind of efforts that they're putting or the kind of contributions and sacrifices they are making there. Those are all driven by that deontic motivation, right? Likewise, there are plenty of other cases. Even in organizations, there are situations which drive people to demonstrate deontic motivation. On that note, and I know we can go on this topic,
Yes.
there's rewards and recognition aspects of organizations which drive engagement as a key, right? One of
Yep.
the keys of driving engagement is rewards and recognition. Quite often, the way we look at any of these contributions, whether it is deontic or otherwise, is also not up to the mark. Kiran and I have a whole host of topics to discuss, and we can go on and on. This podcast can go on for another probably 2 hours or 5 hours or 20 hours for that matter, if we pick each of these threads of engagement. But for today, I think we will kind of draw curtains on the conversation. Kiran, you want to have the last say?
No, I think this was a very good interactive discussion. So there, in a way, we started with what defines high-performing teams, right? What
Yeah,
are the characteristics? And we looked at certain examples of even looking at either Wikipedia or Meta. And we kind of summarized it for you to, as a leader, to develop a high-performing teams. You need to have a truly engaged workforce, right? It is the heartbeat of any high-performing teams. And so it's needless to say, C-suite, they have to relook at and they have to make certain investments in ensuring that their employees are well motivated
yeah,
enough to execute. As we embarking on 2024, it's a great opportunity for C-suite to look at how they can get their workforce engaged. And pretty much, yes.
And to add, be vulnerable and
yes,
invest in yourself as well as leaders so that you can drive high performance teams from the front.
absolutely. On that note, Sudhir, thank you very much for your time today, and watch out for our next podcast series and our upcoming seminar about compassionate leadership and culture activation. We'll be announcing shortly. Both myself and Sudhir will be around there. And in the meantime, if you have any further questions, please feel free to get in touch via our website, infiniterise.in.
Yes.
And you will see that even in the description as well. But thank you, Sudhir. And
Thanks. And on that note, Kiran, I'd also solicit any feedback, comments, and any other inputs that our audiences would want to leave with us, including topics that you want us to cover in the realm of employee well-being, workplace, and work in itself. What's the question that is vexing you so that we can make some of our podcasts relevant to your areas of interest? Yeah.
And it goes to the fact that we both are very passionate with what we do and how we do, right? We are driven with well-defined purpose. We want to make a positive difference to the people and to the organizations. And that's where our enriched experience will certainly, and discussions, right, will certainly bring that difference. And thank you very much, Sudhir. Thank you, our viewers, and we'll be in touch with you. And have a wonderful rest of the day. If we don't speak, have a wonderful new year, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.